Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the scariest folklore or urban legend that you know of? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. There's a local legend about a campsite I used to go camping at here in upstate New York. Legend says that there is a man they call the H-Man that lives out in the woods near the campsite. One year, a group of Boy Scouts were camping out there and one of the boys went missing. They didn't find him until they started packing up to go home. As they were cleaning up and packing up their belongings, they found the missing kid. He was dead under one of the mattresses, with an H carved into his chest. They say that when the H-Man kills campers, he carves an H into your chest. Growing up camping here, all of us kids were terrified of the H-Man. They said if you go exploring deep enough into the woods, you can find his home. Well, there's an abandoned house deep in the woods we found one time. I was shitting my pants. Creepy thing was, it was so deep in the woods, but there were no roads leading to it. No paths leading to it, just a single abandoned house, sitting in the middle of the woods. If you go camping in Minerva, New York, beware the H-Man. In San Antonio, there was a school bus that broke down on a set of train tracks. After getting stuck there, a train immediately barreled down the tracks, and before any of the children could get out of the bus, the train and bus collided and tragically killed all on board. It was such a tragedy that they eventually named all of the nearby streets after these children. So as you drive past a mental institution on roads named after dead children, you come to a hill. On this hill, the road meets the train tracks. You park on the tracks, you put your car in neutral for an added effect, you can put white powder on your bumper, and then you wait. After a little bit, your car randomly starts moving by itself off of the tracks. It's even more odd because your car doesn't go down the hill, but instead goes up the hill. If you put white powder on your bumper, you go and look to find tiny fingerprints. Supposedly, those prints are proof of the reason why your car moved by itself off of the tracks. It's because the ghosts of the children who died in the wreck those years ago are what pushed you off the tracks to save your car and your life from being hit by a train like they were. Buckle up, folks. Here is the only sort of urban legend, etc. that I ever came across. One of my friends back in college lived about 20 to 25 minutes outside of town, in between my college town and a neighboring small town with several of his friends. One Sunday evening at about 10 p.m., they heard an unexpected knock at the door. One of the guys checked the peephole and saw a woman, and immediately something felt off. So we went to his room to obtain his gun and then open the door. The woman was filthy and disheveled, and she immediately pleaded to come inside. Hesitantly, they let her in and asked why the F she was 10 miles from the next town and knocking on their door at night. This woman, albeit frantically, explained that people were looking for her because she had run away from a cult in the next town that had been systematically abusing kids for decades. One guy calls her shit, and she proceeds to pull out a stack of creepy Polaroids of individual children that look almost like booking or intake mugshots in front of a bookcase. She told them that the cops were involved in covering it up and that they couldn't, under any circumstances, call them. The woman asks for a ride into town to get on a bus so she can travel to this attorney she's been in contact with. She doesn't need money, doesn't need anything but a ride to the bus station, and has sealed lips. For whatever effing reason, my friends agree to take her into town and drop her off at the Greyhound station. One gave her his number and said to update him when she got herself together. They drive all the way back to their house and immediately succumb to the paranoia, agreeing that it would be best to call the police. A couple sheriffs and a couple cops from the next town over show up and question them about the woman's appearance, where they took her, what she said, etc. Well, they lie and say that they simply took her into town and dropped her off at a grocery store parking lot, making no mention of the children, the cult, etc. The cops take their report and all leave, except the two policemen from the small town, who come back and proceed to grill the ever-loving shit out of these guys about exactly what the woman said. where they took her, and why they gave her a ride. They were really aggressive, but when nobody had any information to provide them, they gave up and left with instructions to call them, and only them, if they had a similar occurrence. I never heard back from the woman. I never got another visit from the cops, and I never saw anything in the news. Kind of torn on that one. I mean, she wasn't looking for a handout. Do you know there's a cult there in the in the next town over? Didn't seem to be an ulterior motive. I'd like to think that I maybe would have offered assistance as well, but I wouldn't fault anybody for not. A long time ago, before this particular campsite establishment was founded, there was a widow who lived in the area alone with her child. She had lost her husband in some sort of accident and had no job or family to support her. She eventually lost her house to foreclosure, forcing her to live alone up in the mountains as a hermit with her 6-month-old baby. She lived off the land, scraping and salvaging what she could, and despite her conditions, she was able to take care of her child. On one unfortunate night, there was a severely disturbed man who had escaped the local asylum and fled up into the mountains where the widow lived. The man stumbled upon her campsite in the middle of the night, and in his moment of insanity, he armed her and then slashed her throat with a knife. As she lay bleeding on the ground dying, he approached the crib where his baby was sleeping and stood over it. After a brief pause, he began hacking the baby's head off, the widow still alive and witnessing the act. When the deed was done, he took the baby's head in one hand and walked off into the night. Using the last ounces of her strength, she crawled toward the child's lifeless corpse and cradled its body till she finally passed. When their bodies were finally discovered, the police launched a 3-day investigation and search for the man who was still at large in the mountains. On the 3rd day, he was finally apprehended, blood and viscera still caked to his arms and chest, all the evidence that he committed the crime. But they couldn't find the baby's head. Did he throw it down a ravine? Did he bury it in the forest? Did he eat it? No one knows. Although decades have passed since the incident, it was said that on calm nights like this one, the widow's spirit would rise up and roam the mountains and the forests, her cries of pain and anguish echoing through the valleys. It is said that he searches for his child's missing head, but because she has been roaming for so long, she had forgotten what it looked like, and in her grief, if she sees you, she'll charge at you, screaming, and try to take your head off. And only when she tries to put it back on her baby's body will she realize that it's not the right head. So she'll throw your head away and keep searching for another head till the break of dawn. If the story was too graphic or violent, I apologize. I'm kinda new at this. The funny thing about this story was that at the time, my friends and I were about 11 or 12 years old, and the story didn't scare us that much. It took a lot to faze us. But one of our older staff members, who was like a senior, about to graduate high school, was scared shitless by this story. So much so that he wasn't able to sleep the last few days of the trip. There was a cemetery about a mile from where I grew up in the middle of nowhere that dates back to around 1850. Everyone who died in the area was buried there for a while, but it's been owned by one family for about 60 years, so they're the only ones who use it now. One of the graves has a big crow carved out of wood, I think, and painted black. It's ominous as hell and always creeped me out as a kid. It was always there, brooding over the grave. We drove by one Sunday on the way to church, and the crow effing turned and looked at me. I almost spit on my pants. It flapped its wings and flew away. I swear to God that effing thing was perched there in the same position without moving for years, until one day it flew away. I never saw it again. I still have no idea what the deal was. Was it a real bird that had always happened to land in that same spot and perched there perfectly still while I was watching day after day and year after year? Or was it carved bird that I hallucinated flying away? Was it something else? Either way, I'm not setting foot in that goddamn cemetery ever, and I'm still irrationally afraid of crows. A long time ago in the Pine Barrens, a desolate, empty place in the middle of a marsh, a pregnant mother was in the middle of giving birth to her 13th child. This was the worst birth of all her children. The unborn baby fought and tried to stay put, but the midwives were much stronger and had successfully birthed more troublesome babies in the past. The mother, Mama Leeds, as she was known, successfully birthed more and couldn't handle the pain. She screamed and cried, and the weather outside went from a cool October night into a violent storm, thunder, lightning, rain, and wind. It was almost as if the mother and the storm were one. At the peak of the painful birth, his mother cried out, "This child is cursed. He has been laid by the devil's seed. I curse this child. Let it be a devil." As she cursed the child, Mother Leeds passed out. Eventually, the midwives brought her around and placed the child in her arms. He was a beautiful child with clean, pink skin and chubby arms and face. But the child began crying, and as he cried, his skin turned black and serpent-like. Horns sprouted from his head, and his body elongated. The chubby little fingers and toes melded into hooves, and a tail began thrashing about. Terror and chaos ensued. The demon child was now twice the size of a grown man and monstrous. The midwives were the first ones to be eaten before the devil went after his siblings and disappeared into the storm. Thus begins the tale of the Jersey Devil. First of all, this is a story I got told by a former coworker, so I don't know for sure if it's just another creepypasta or if there's some truth to it, although the guy claimed to know the person the following story is about. We live in a pretty rural area, and there was a nightclub where a lot of young people were visiting on the weekends. Because the next big city is so far away, many of those visitors had to drive, to get there. One night a young woman didn't feel so well and decided to drive home a bit earlier than her friends. She gets into her car and is on the way home. Not far away from the small town the club was in, she noticed something standing in the road that she's driving on. Because there are often deer and other wild animals crossing the road, she slows down a bit and approaches the supposed animal with caution. To her surprise, it was not a deer but a baby stroller, standing there in the middle of the road. She comes to a stop and, against better judgment, decides to investigate. Because what's going to happen anyway? Certainly somebody just dumped it here. As she gets closer to the stroller, she notices the headlights of a car in the distance behind her, which gives her a weird sense of safety, because she doesn't feel that alone in this moment. The stroller's empty after all, so she pushes it to the side of the road and gets back into her car. Since she saw the lights of the car just a moment ago, she decided to let it pass her first before hitting the road again. A vehicle approaches, and to her surprise it doesn't pass her, but come to a stop right behind her. Both doors open almost immediately, coming to a halt, which gives her a bad feeling. So instead of waiting, she floors the gas and drives off. After a short while, she notices the same car behind her, and because the bad feeling still lingers, she decides to take a detour in the next village, making a turn here and there just to shake them off. Slowly, panic begins to set in as the car is still behind her, turn here and turn there. After some time, and it's now driving seriously and dangerously close and giving her light signals. This goes on for a while, and because she doesn't know what to do, she takes out her phone and calls her dad. After explaining the situation as well as she could, he advised her to just head home as fast as possible, and he would leave the front door open while calling the police to the menace. She gets home, slams the door of her car open, and rushes into the house, where her parents are already waiting for her. They close the door and wait for the police to arrive. A few minutes later, the doorbell rings, and instead of the police, two worried-looking young men are standing there asking if the girl they're following is all right. As it turns out, they were heading home as well after clubbing, and saw somebody entering her car while she was pushing her stroller to the side of the road. They followed her, so the guy in the back seat couldn't do anything. After she stopped in front of the house, the guy jumped out as well, and they were trying to chase him down, but he got away. Nobody knows what would have happened if the two guys weren't arrested in that moment. The road where this allegedly took place is in a pretty remote area with lots of parking and woods around it. I think I never read about it in the papers, which is strange considering the police were supposedly involved. I still get creeped out every time I'm driving down that same road though, so I thought I'd share the story.